Before you think your life is shaped by luck, talent, or hard work, pause. Look closely at the people you love, the ones you chase, the ones you tolerate, the ones you fear losing, because long before you chose your career, your habits, or even your dreams, your relationships were already choosing you. And if you don't understand how they shape your life, you'll keep living the same emotional story, just with different faces. Your nervous system learns love before your mind understands it, because long before you had language, logic, or self awareness, your body was already collecting data. It was registering tone, facial expressions, pauses, tension, warmth, withdrawal. As a child, you didn't analyze whether you were loved, you felt it. Love wasn't a concept, it was a sensation. It lived in the way someone responded when you cried, the speed at which comfort arrived, the predictability of affection, the safety of being seen without being corrected. Your nervous system stored these moments as truth, not memory. And once something is stored in the nervous system, it doesn't ask for permission from the mind later. It simply reacts. This is why, as adults, people often find themselves emotionally pulled towards situations they intellectually know are unhealthy. The mind can list red flags with clarity, but the body feels something else entirely. The nervous system isn't seeking logic or longevity. It's seeking recognition. It's scanning for familiar emotional rhythms, not conscious compatibility. If love once arrived with anxiety, inconsistency, or emotional distance, your system learned to associate those sensations with connection. Calm might now feel unfamiliar. Stability might feel empty. Safety might feel undeserved. And so the body leans toward what it already knows, even when that knowing came from chaos. The nervous system is not concerned with your happiness, it is concerned with your survival. As a child, adapting to the emotional environment around you was not a choice, it was a necessity. If love was unpredictable, you learned to stay alert. If affection was earned, you learned to perform. If emotional needs were ignored, you learned to minimize them. These adaptations kept you connected to caregivers, which the body interpreted as survival. Years later, those same adaptations show up as people-pleasing, hyper-independence, emotional numbness, or anxious attachment, and they feel natural because they once kept you safe. This is why healing relationships feels uncomfortable at first, not because they are wrong, but because they are unfamiliar to your nervous system. When someone communicates clearly, stays consistent, and doesn't withdraw affection as punishment, your body may not relax, it may brace. There is no emotional spike, no chase, no urgency. And without realizing it, the mind labels this as lack of chemistry, while the body is actually learning a new definition of love, one that doesn't require self-abandonment, vigilance, or emotional labor to earn closeness. Understanding this changes how you approach relationships. It shifts the question from, why do I keep choosing the same people, to, what does my nervous system recognize as love? Because awareness alone begins to interrupt the pattern. When you stop shaming yourself for your attractions and start listening to your body with curiosity, you create space for new experiences to register as safe. Over time, with repeated exposure to consistency, respect, and emotional presence, the nervous system can relearn. And when the body learns something new, the mind finally follows. You repeat relationship patterns until you become conscious of them, because the unconscious mind is designed to conserve energy, not to evolve. What is familiar feels efficient, predictable, and therefore safe, even when it causes pain. Most people believe they are making fresh choices in love, but in reality, they are replaying emotional scripts written long before they had the power to question them. The faces change, the circumstances change, but the emotional dynamic remains the same. The same disappointment, the same longing, the same feeling of not being met shows up again and again. And it feels confusing because on the surface, everything looks different. Patterns repeat because unresolved emotional experiences seek completion. The nervous system is always trying to finish what was left unfinished. If you never felt chosen, you unconsciously pursue people who are hard to choose you. If you grew up feeling responsible for other people's emotions, you gravitate toward partners who need fixing. If love required endurance, sacrifice, or emotional suppression, you recreate situations where you must prove your worth by staying longer than you should. This isn't self-sabotage, it's self-protection shaped by the past. The mind may say, I want something different, but the body keeps steering you back to what it recognizes. Unconscious patterns thrive in blindness. As long as you believe the problem is bad luck, timing, or other people, the pattern stays intact. Consciousness is disruptive. The moment you start noticing your emotional reactions, your attractions, and your triggers without immediately acting on them, the cycle weakens. You begin to see how quickly you attach, how deeply you tolerate, how often you explain away behavior that hurts you. Awareness doesn't instantly stop the pattern, but it creates a pause. And in that pause, choice becomes possible. What makes these patterns so powerful is that they are reinforced emotionally, not logically. The mind might recognize that a situation is unhealthy, but the emotional payoff feels compelling. Intensity feels like connection. Anxiety feels like passion. Familiar pain feels better than unfamiliar peace. Until you become conscious of this, you will keep confusing emotional activation with love. You will mistake longing for compatibility and endurance for commitment. And because the nervous system is driving the experience, the repetition feels involuntary, almost inevitable. Becoming conscious doesn't mean blaming your past or dissecting every relationship endlessly. It means observing yourself honestly, noticing who you feel pulled toward, and asking what that pull is asking you to relive. Recognizing your role in staying, chasing, overgiving, or shutting down. Consciousness turns reaction into reflection. Instead of asking, why does this keep happening to me? The question becomes, what am I recreating and why does it feel familiar? That shift alone begins to loosen the grip of the pattern because what is seen clearly can no longer run silently in the background. The people closest to you shape your self-worth and identity because human beings do not develop in isolation. You learn who you are through reflection, through response, through how others meet you emotionally. Before you ever formed a solid sense of self, you were already receiving feedback about your worth, sometimes in words, but more often in behavior. You learned how important you were by how quickly someone responded to your needs, how seriously your feelings were taken, and whether your presence felt welcomed or tolerated. These early relational experiences quietly taught you what to expect from others, and more importantly, what to expect from yourself. Self-worth is not something most people consciously choose. It is something they absorb. If the people closest to you listened when you spoke, valued your perspective, and respected your boundaries, you internalized the belief that you matter. If you were dismissed, criticized, or emotionally overlooked, you learned to shrink. You learned to question your instincts, to doubt your feelings, to over-explain your needs. Over time, these responses became internalized voices. Even when those people are no longer present, their impact remains, shaping the way you speak to yourself, the standards you hold, and the level of respect you believe you deserve. Identity forms in relationship as well. Who you believe you are is deeply influenced by who you had to become to stay connected. If being agreeable kept the peace, you became agreeable. If being strong earned approval, you became strong. If being quiet avoided conflict, you learned silence. These adaptations weren't choices, they were survival strategies. And while they once served a purpose, they often linger long after the environment has changed. Many adults are still living out identities that were created to protect them, not to express them. The people closest to you continue to shape you even in adulthood. Romantic partners, close friends, family. These relationships either reinforce or challenge your internal narrative. When someone consistently dismisses your feelings, you begin to question their validity. When someone celebrates your growth, you feel more confident stepping into yourself. When you are constantly misunderstood, you start editing parts of who you are. Over time, this editing becomes self-erasure, and it often happens so subtly that you don't realize you've abandoned yourself until you feel disconnected and lost. This is why surrounding yourself with emotionally healthy people is not a luxury. It is a necessity for psychological well-being. Healthy relationships don't just make you feel good, they recalibrate your sense of self. They show you that your needs are reasonable, your boundaries are valid, and your voice has weight. In the presence of safety, your nervous system relaxes, and when it relaxes, you have access to parts of yourself that were previously guarded or hidden. You begin to discover who you are without the constant pressure to perform, adapt, or prove your worth. When you start changing the people you keep close, your identity naturally begins to shift. You no longer have to fight to be seen or heard. You stop negotiating your value. You start showing up more authentically, not because you're trying harder, but because you're finally in environments that allow you to be fully yourself. Unhealed attachment wounds quietly dictate adult choices because what was once an emotional injury becomes an invisible compass. Attachment wounds are formed when core needs for safety, consistency, affection, or emotional attunement were unmet or met unpredictably. As children, we don't have the ability to question the environment we're in, so we adapt to it. Those adaptations become embedded responses, shaping how we relate to closeness, distance, conflict, and vulnerability. By adulthood, these patterns feel like personality traits or preferences, when in reality, they are unresolved emotional strategies designed to prevent pain. Anxious attachment wounds often show up as a constant fear of abandonment, an over-focus on a partner's behavior, and a deep sensitivity to emotional shifts. Adults with these wounds may choose partners who are emotionally unavailable or inconsistent, not because they enjoy the pain, but because the dynamic activates a familiar emotional state. The nervous system confuses anxiety with connection, urgency with love. Decisions around who to pursue, how much to tolerate, and when to stay are driven by the hope of finally receiving what was missing, even if the cost is self-respect or emotional stability. Avoidant attachment wounds operate differently but are equally influential. When closeness once felt overwhelming, intrusive, or unsafe, the adult response is distance. People with avoidant wounds may prioritize independence, minimize emotional needs, or feel suffocated by intimacy. They often choose relationships that allow emotional space or partners who don't ask for depth. On the surface, these choices look rational and controlled, but underneath them is a fear of being consumed, exposed, or disappointed. The avoidance is not a lack of desire for connection, but a learned belief that connection comes with risk. Disorganized attachment wounds create the most internal conflict. When love was both comforting and frightening, the adult experience becomes contradictory. There is a strong desire for closeness paired with an equally strong urge to pull away. These individuals may find themselves cycling between intense attachment and sudden withdrawal, craving intimacy while feeling unsafe within it. Their choices often appear confusing even to themselves as they move toward what they fear and away from what they want. This inner push-pull is exhausting and deeply rooted in unresolved emotional trauma. What makes attachment wounds so powerful is how quietly they operate. They influence career choices, friendships, boundaries, and self perception without conscious awareness. Someone may stay in an unfulfilling job because stability feels safer than risk, or overextend themselves in relationships to feel needed, or avoid commitment while convincing themselves they simply haven't met the right person. These decisions feel logical in the moment, but they are often responses to old emotional pain rather than present day reality. Until these wounds are brought into awareness, adulthood becomes a repetition of emotional history rather than an expression of choice. You don't attract what you want. You attract what feels familiar because attraction is not driven by conscious desire. It is driven by emotional memory. What pulls you towards someone is rarely a checklist of qualities and far more often a sensation in the body that says, "This feels known." Familiarity creates a sense of predictability for the nervous system, even when the outcome has historically been painful. The body recognizes emotional patterns faster than the mind can assess character, and it moves toward what it has been trained to understand, not what it has been taught to aspire to. Familiarity is built through repetition, especially early repetition. The emotional environments you grew up in taught your nervous system what to expect from closeness, conflict, and affection. If love was inconsistent, dramatic, or required effort to maintain, your system learned that intensity equals connection. As an adult, calm interactions may feel flat or uninteresting, while unpredictable ones spark attraction. This doesn't mean you consciously want chaos. It means your body associates heightened emotion with intimacy. You're not drawn to the person, you're drawn to the emotional state they activate. This is why people often find themselves in relationships that look different on the surface but feel identical underneath. The same emotional distance, the same power imbalance, the same sense of longing or self doubt repeats. The attraction feels magnetic, immediate, and difficult to explain, while healthier options feel neutral or even uncomfortable. What's happening is not a failure of judgment, but a conditioned response. The nervous system is scanning for emotional familiarity, not long term safety, and it mistakes recognition for compatibility. Wanting something different is not enough to create change. You can want respect, consistency, and emotional presence, but still feel bored or disconnected when you encounter them. This creates internal confusion and often self blame. People tell themselves they are broken, too picky, or incapable of love, when in reality they are in the process of unlearning. The gap between what the mind desires and what the body is drawn to can feel frustrating, but it is also revealing. It shows where emotional conditioning still lives. Familiar attraction keeps you loyal to old narratives. It reinforces beliefs about how much effort love should require, how much you should tolerate, and how available you're allowed to be. Breaking this cycle doesn't happen through force or logic, but through awareness and repetition of new experiences. As you slowly expose yourself to relationships that are steady, respectful, and emotionally clear, the unfamiliar begins to soften. What once felt boring begins to feel peaceful. What once felt intense begins to feel destabilizing. Over time, your nervous system learns a new definition of connection, and familiarity starts to shift towards safety rather than survival. Changing your relationships changes the trajectory of your life because relationships are not just a part of your life, they are the environment in which your life unfolds. Every close connection you maintain influences how you think, how you feel, how you behave, and what you believe is possible for you. The people you spend the most time with become mirrors, reflecting back versions of yourself that either limit or expand you. When those reflections are rooted in criticism, inconsistency, or emotional neglect, you begin to internalize those dynamics and make life decisions from a place of self doubt and emotional survival rather than clarity and confidence. Relationships shape your daily emotional baseline. Being around people who are draining, dismissive, or unpredictable keeps your nervous system in a constant state of alertness. In that state, your focus narrows, your creativity diminishes, and your capacity to take healthy risks disappears. You become reactive instead of intentional. Over time, this emotional exhaustion affects everything from career choices to personal growth. You may settle for less, stay stuck in familiar patterns, or avoid opportunities that require confidence and trust. Not because you lack potential, but because your emotional resources are constantly being depleted. When you change your relationships, you change the emotional conditions under which you operate. Supportive, respectful connections allow your nervous system to relax. In that safety, your mind opens. You think more clearly, you make decisions with intention, and you begin to trust yourself. Healthy relationships don't push you to be someone else. They create space for you to become more of who you are. This shift is subtle but profound. You start setting better boundaries, speaking more honestly, and taking steps that once felt impossible because you are no longer negotiating your worth in every interaction. The trajectory of your life is also shaped by what your relationships normalize. If struggle, chaos, or emotional inconsistency are normalized, you may come to believe that life is meant to be endured rather than enjoyed. If respect, accountability, and emotional presence are normalized, your expectations rise, not just in relationships, but in every area of your life. You begin to choose environments, work, and experiences that align with that new standard. This isn't about cutting people off impulsively. It's about choosing proximity wisely and recognizing that access to you is influential. As relationships change, identity follows. You stop performing roles that kept you connected at the cost of yourself. You no longer have to shrink, overgive, or stay silent to maintain belonging. This internal shift alters how you move through the world. Opportunities that once felt intimidating feel accessible. Goals that felt unrealistic feel achievable. The path ahead opens not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you are no longer carrying the emotional weight of relationships that were holding you in place. When you look at your life honestly, you begin to see that it has never been shaped by single moments, but by emotional patterns repeated over time. Your nervous system learned love before your mind could question it. Your attachment wounds quietly guided your choices. Familiarity disguised itself as attraction. The people closest to you influenced how you saw yourself, what you tolerated, and what you believed you deserved. None of this happened because you were weak or unaware. It happened because connection is a survival need and you adapted in order to belong. Awareness is where everything begins to change. When you become conscious of your patterns, relationships stop being something that happens to you and start becoming something you participate in intentionally. You begin to recognize the difference between intensity and intimacy, between familiarity and safety, between attachment and love. You understand that the discomfort you feel around healthier connections is not a sign of incompatibility, but evidence of growth. And with that understanding, you stop repeating emotional history and start creating a different future. Changing your relationships is not about perfection or cutting people out impulsively. It is about choosing environments that support regulation instead of chaos, truth instead of fear, and growth instead of survival. As your relationships shift, your self-worth stabilizes, your identity strengthens, and your decisions become clearer. The trajectory of your life changes, not because you forced transformation, but because you finally aligned your connections with the person you are becoming.